paramedics brought him in, and I remember standing at the foot of her bed because I was just a baby EMT. I wasn't allowed to really do anything there. If you can imagine standing inside of a trauma room, they're usually like a squat rectangle, so they're maybe 10 feet wide by 12 feet long. The gurney's in the middle, and there's crash carts on sides, there's oxygen behind, and there's, maybe a sink or a countertop on the other side. I was standing at the foot of her bed, and there was nurses and firefighters on one side. There was a doctor and some other nurses and maybe some techs on the other. I remember standing there and just feeling this super immense sadness. Like if you stand in a cold pool, you can feel the weight of the water, the cold water on you, but it's not covering your entire body. That's kind of how it felt. I turned, and the woman from the car crash was standing just right behind me. And I just looked right at her, and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at herself on the table. And she was wearing a white colored shirt. She had long hair, and it was her brown hair was tucked behind her ears. And it was a lot for me to take in the moment. This was all really heavy information. This lady's dying. They're talking about her being a wife and a mom, and people are yelling, starting IVs and hooking her up to leads and intubating her, trying to keep this lady alive, and there wasn't a lot they could do. And then to turn around and see her there, I was questioning my sanity. Like, am I going nuts? But she was there. There's no doubt in my mind. So anyway, I screamed, and one of the nurses helped me leave, and I went and sat down outside. I didn't want to be around that. So I left, went to another patient, went to another room, went somewhere else. When the nurse escorted me out, it felt like everybody in the room was like, oh, the new guy, his first dead body, this is, let's get him out of here and get him to a safe place where he can put his head between his knees and breathe into a paper bag. I felt like the rookie. Am I even cut out for this job? Like, am I tough enough for this? Am I emotionally strong enough to handle this job? So I was in an EMS course, so I had to find a job while I was in school, and the school happened during the day. I took a job at Great America. Two people in the course of a year died at the amusement park. One guy jumped a fence to get a hat and literally got his jaw kicked off by a person riding the ride. I mean, he jumped 2 fences, all of it said, "Do not cross." So I was in the security booth at the end of the day watching the video of this. We were watching the actual video of this guy's death, the moment of this guy's death, over and over, and he was watching his own death with us. The man who had been recently killed was standing behind me, but between myself and another officer. He wasn't looking at any of us, and I don't even really feel like he was looking at the screen. He was just faced forward. He could have been anywhere, but I think that he was drawn to the fact that I knew he was there. It felt like he was trying to express something. Like he was trying to get a point across. This can't be real. I was just trying to get my hat. Like, this wasn't supposed to happen. I was just getting my hat. And I could see what he was wearing out of the corner of my eye. I honestly, I didn't want to turn. I was so afraid that I was going to see this guy without a jaw. But I knew he was there, and I knew he was feeling this anxiety, and I couldn't leave because I was surrounded by dudes, and these are Great America security, so They weren't picking like hardened soldiers or anything like that. It was just a bunch of dudes who wanted a summer job. But I wanted to impress them. I didn't want to look like a coward, so I didn't say anything. And I was terrified. I didn't want to turn around. And we were all just kind of like taking in this moment. Because we hadn't, some of these guys have been working at the park for 15 years and never seen that. I just turned my body just enough to be able to see that someone was there, and then I'd turn back. And I remember doing it maybe twice. And the third time turning, he wasn't there and the feeling stopped. And it didn't ebb, it just, it was gone. Every time I saw a presence, every time I was around one, I still wanted to create distance. I think that I was still, on one hand, I was still learning how to be an EMT and how to take this job seriously. The whole world is like Disneyland. Like everything, your eyes are huge. You want to be a part of every trauma. You want to be a part of, the multiple car wrecks. You want to pull people out of burning buildings. You want to do the stuff from the movies.
And were you more interested in like the heroic aspect of the work than maybe like the human suffering element of it? Were you like,
Absolutely. Nobody enters the EMS field because they want to spend hours upon hours with a patient, nurturing them back to health. And for people who work in EMS, it's not that they're not compassionate, but they're drawn to the heroic, fix the immediate problem and get the patient to a place where the people with abundance of compassion can kind of take over and do that caring. This is now 17, 18 years later. I'm 40 years old. I'm married. I've got 2 kids and a dog. This was around September. So I went to the grocery store, and it was night. So it had to be after like 9:30. And on my way back towards my house, so this lady is just standing in front of her house. The lady is standing in her driveway, which probably isn't even a half a mile from my house. So I've made it almost all the way home. And so it's September, it's hot, but she's in a night slip. The nightgown was shiny and real thin. It had like little thin straps over her shoulders. She was pale, silver hair, a little bit past her shoulders, but she's standing right in front of her house. And so I was just kind of watching her, like being like really confused, like, what is she doing? Like I knew inside that she wasn't alive. I just knew. And she stared right at me. And honestly, and I can't tell you why, and I feel like an idiot for even saying it, I pulled over. And she was standing in the driveway, and she watched me as I pulled past, and I pulled in front of her house, and she was looking my direction, and I got out, and she was just staring at me. Like, this is really weird, because they don't stare at me. Like, they're not looking for me. She's making eye contact. She was looking right at me. And so I didn't approach her. I didn't even close my door. Like, I got out, and she took a step forward, which was super weird. And I was like, it made me kind of wonder, like, maybe she's not. Maybe she's just like a crazy lady standing out, late at night. She was probably 30 feet away, and she took another step. And I said hello, and it seemed to just piss her off. she took another step, and then took another step, and then took another step, and stopped. This had never occurred. They've always just kind of like accepted that I was kind of around. And so she just started walking like really quickly. She took probably 14 really quick steps around the back of my car. I was fucking scared. And like she mouthed something and then took a couple more steps. I got in my car and shut the door. As she walked up and stood, but she didn't look inside my car. She walked up and just stood there. What the fuck? Like, can they reach in? Like, can they reach through shit? And she just stood there. She didn't look at me. She just stood there. And I sat there and she stood there. And we just, for a couple minutes, just kind of sat that way. So I turned my engine over. And then she just put her hand on the door of the car. And I was like, fuck it. And I flew home, pulled in the garage, shut the garage door, didn't get out of my car. Like, do I get out of my car in this dark garage? Is she gonna be standing there when I get out of my car? When I turn to go up the stairs, is she gonna be standing at the top of the stairs? If I wake up, is she gonna be looking at me, you know? When I open the door to leave, is she gonna be standing out there? Like, just the terrifying, like, thoughts that you have when you're watching a scary movie and you know it's not real. You know this is like, you know it's not real, but this happened. This like happened to me. I let fear just have its way with me that night. Like, I was terrified. I just let myself slip into it. And since then, I've kind of come to a mental agreement with myself that they can't do anything to me that I don't let them do. If I give them access to my fears, if I give them access to my heart and my mind like that, it's gonna control me, and fear is gonna be kind of the guiding factor in my life. After seeing the lady, I remember sitting down days later, because that whole weekend I just had to just relax and try and not to freak out. But I sat down on my laptop and was just researching it. Like, why does this happen? I just Google, visiting spirits or presences. So the Irish believe in this thing called thin places. And what they believe is that the supernatural world and the natural world, what we call the natural world, coexist, and there are thin places where that existence is easily transgressed. A lot of people, especially the Celts, believe that people can be thin places and can kind of carry a mantle of thinness. Before meeting her, I never really thought about being like an active thin place. But when I realized that these people, these presences are there, I have the desire to be compassionate. But I also, my first instinct is to create distance.
It's not over, snappers. It's not even close to over. Stay tuned. Spooksters, thanks for listening to this episode of our new season of Spooked. We're very proud because we're making this in partnership with WNYC Studios and the new Luminary Podcast Network, Be Afraid. 26 new episodes of Spook drop this season each week through Halloween and into a spooky November. Listen to them all by downloading the Luminary mobile app or go to luminarypodcast.com. Martin Mosley, he just discovered that he is a thin place, a magnet for those beyond the veil. And the worst part, Martin's surrounded by the dead and dying. Sensitive listeners are advised.
Cowboy was the most recent. I was there the night he came in, and he came in with a GI bleed, gastrointestinal bleed. If you're not vomiting up the blood that's bleeding in your stomach, then the acids are already processing the blood, and it coagulates, and it looks like coffee grounds, like wet coffee grounds.
What would cause a GI bleed?
Alcoholism. And he had been struggling with health issues for years.
And how many times had you treated him?
This was the second time I had seen him. He came in for a GI bleed. We were able to treat it. Most of the time you can, unless you're far enough along in the disease process when there's not a lot you can do. It's just the damage, so much damage usually is done that, I mean, the little band-aids we put over it aren't gonna do the job. And he came in, and he's a funny guy, older, really clever, like sharp. He told me this story about the first girl he slept with, and I was laughing. And it's, he was probably a little more crass, because we developed some rapport. He was pink, warm, and dry the first time he came in, and he stayed overnight. This time he was pale, and he was kind of gaunt, and he had lost his shine. He was clearly scared, and he had been throwing up just these coffee grounds. So we brought him in, and he was just kind of sad. The floor nurses were having a little bit of trouble getting another IV on him, so I went down and I sat with him. So I was able to get his IV started. I got the fluids running. So I was trying to joke with him, and I asked him to tell me some stories from his life, and he did, and we laughed, and so I got up and I was like, hey, you need anything else? I asked if he wanted any coffee. It was kind of like this joke we had developed because of the coffee grounds. And so I'd ask him if he wanted a cup of coffee, and it was always no, because I think that after seeing that, the last thing you'll ever want again is coffee. And so we laughed, and then I left. And later that night, I walked down to the floor, and the nurse that was there came out of his room just running down the hall, and she said, something's happening. He's not okay. And so I ran around the hallway, and he was laying not vertically in bed anymore like you're supposed to. He was laying with his feet off the side, and he was splayed back. So we went in and we started doing compressions. We checked his pulse, and he didn't make it. So we put him back in bed, and we spent some time cleaning him up and getting him on some clean sheets. And one of the nurses was already trying to get a hold of family to let them know. We're trying to get a hold of a mortuary to come pick up the body, and it was a bummer. It's 50 yards from the nurse's desk to this guy's room, but it's probably another 100 down the end of this hallway, and then you hang a right down to the ER, and that's where I spend most of my time. So I went back that way because I was going to type up, my charting notes about what happened. Finished that up, did some filing, put some stuff away, texted my wife, and I was like, I'm gonna head back down and see if they need any help with anything, because he's not a dead body is heavy, or if you're moving a body that isn't cooperating, it's really hard to get them. So I didn't know if the mortuary was there yet. If they got a hold of him, they might be there by then, and I could go help him out. So I walked back down, and I got to the room, and a guy in a cowboy hat and like a blue plaid shirt with the cowboy Wrangler jeans and boots was standing next to the body. And I stopped. I didn't even enter. I just stopped, and I was like, okay, family's here. And I backed away, and I went down, and I didn't bring it up. I just went down and hung out kind of at the nurse's station. I got myself a cup of coffee. Probably 25 minutes went by while I was down there. I was like, I should go check on him. And I went back, and there wasn't anybody there. I thought it was weird because typically in those situations, if somebody's going to get up at 3 a.m. to come by, they want to talk, or they just want somebody around. So I thought, well, I'm here. I'm going to grab this guy's stuff. And the top drawer had his phone and a notepad. It was some writing on it. And I opened the bottom drawer. And as soon as I pulled it out, there was a cowboy hat underneath it. And I looked inside, and the shirt was there, and the top of the boots. And it was a really strange, like, realization that he was there. Like, that was him looking down at his own body. I regret that I hadn't known at the time. If I had known, I would have stayed. Like, if I had had a clue that it was him, I probably would have stayed and hung out. You know, I made a little bit of an emotional connection. You share a laugh with somebody, and you have a moment with somebody, and we remembered each other, and we, you know, it was like a happy, like, recognition when I saw him in the ER before, and knocking on his door and giving a little 2-finger wave or whatever. Like, it felt like we were more than just strangers, you know, on a train. It felt like we were at least friendly acquaintances. So I think that really for the first time any time I've ever felt a presence or seen a presence, the first time I've ever really regretted not saying something. This is the rest of the time, what do I say to this person? I don't know them. I really honestly didn't know or didn't have any connection with any of them, but for the first time it really felt like I kind of wish I just reached out, you know, maybe not physically, but just to express some sort of like genuine condolence. I would love to say that going forward, I'm gonna offer that compassion that I wanted to give the cowboy to everybody. And I think that over the years, my heart has gone from soft and rookie vomiting in the street and screaming when he sees someone, and now maybe I'm more grizzled, but maybe I'm just tired too, you know, of the show.
And how do you feel about being a thin place now?
If I'm being honest, I could leave it. I'd rather not have that responsibility. I mean, when I think about the light of someone's life going out and then seeing them after that, before they go on to whatever happens after they die, it feels like a really heavy responsibility. And I honestly, I would just as soon not have it. You know, it's not like the Sixth Sense where you're seeing these like things just anywhere. It's not like a party trick. It's not fun. And honestly, since the lady on the street, in the back of my mind somewhere is this new little flicker and flame of fear that something like that's gonna happen again. If they were all like the cowboy, and I could live with, you know, this gift of compassion and feel like I was doing something positive and something positive was coming from it, then I think I'd feel better about it. But since that lady, that flicker of fear is always there. Every time I walk through my house with the lights off, you know, every time I walk from my car to my house, or I'm driving every time I drive home from the grocery store, you know, that little flicker of flame can burn really hot sometimes and cause a wave of fear that I honestly would just rather not have, if it's all the same.
Thank you, Martin Mosley, for sharing your story with us. Martin is a longtime Spook listener, and he reached out with this story. We love it when Spook listeners rock a story they have to let the world know. And if you have a story that you need to tell, please send it our way. spooked@snapjudgment.org. And please understand, the journey is not over. The journey, dear listeners, has just begun. Get ready for a season of Spook, the likes of which have never been known, never been seen. Be afraid. And if you're looking for amazing storytelling under the full light of day, there are scores of stories available right now at our sister podcast, Snap Judgment. Spook was brought to you by the team that would like to extend a helping hand, but knows too well the horrible cost. Mark Ristich, Eliza Smith, Anna Sussman. My name is Glenn Washington. The original score for that story was by Renzo Gorio. Our theme music is by Pat Mesiti-Miller. Now, he may even wear a sweater. Just like Mr. Rogers, a nice friendly smile goes to his imaginary land. But listen when I tell you, no matter what he says, and no matter how he asks it, please, begs, listen when I tell you. Never, ever, never, ever, never, 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 ever turn out the lights. This episode of Spooked was summoned in the dark of night by Luminary Media.
For all the newest episodes of Spooked, go to luminarypodcast.com or download the Luminary mobile app.
From Luminary Media, you've crossed over to Spooked. This is just one of the episodes of our new season. All the newest episodes of Spooked are only available on Luminary. You can hear 2 episodes each week on Mondays and Thursdays through Halloween. Just go to luminarypodcast.com or download the Luminary mobile app. See, if I'm on the street and someone slights me, knocks my papers to the ground, calls me names, even raises their hand to me, like what happened the other day, the truth is, I'm likely to let it go. To slowly pick my things up off the ground, to say the calming word, even to turn the other cheek. Everybody just calm down. Everything's gonna be alright. Understand, I'm a lover, not a fighter, but if I'm walking with one of my babies, my good children, my happy kids, my nappy-headed monsters, if I'm walking down the street with one of my babies and someone steps to one of them, says something untoward, or God forbid, raise their hand in my child's direction and I see it, retribution will be immediate, unkind, out of all proportion. There will in fact be hell to pay, just like any other parent. Any other parent. And if the threat to them is not the crazy down the street or the entitled imbecile with the $1,000 briefcase, but if this threat comes from beyond the veil, then the pain and the retribution, well, that's going beyond the veil too. From WNYC Studios and Snap Judgment's underground layout, my name is Glenn Washington. If you think that being a spirit gives you a place to escape, think again. Spook starts now. Now then, our first storyteller, his mother, she took her job her job of taking care of him. She took it very seriously. Spooked.
I was actually sitting on the doorstep. It was summertime outside eating a popsicle, and this strange looking woman came up to the front of the house, and I was a little bit terrified of her. She was our next door neighbor. She came over to the house to introduce herself. It was the middle of summer, and she was dressed in an old wool overcoat and had a scarf on and a hat, and she was a little bit creepy to a 4-year-old. I immediately just ran inside, got my mom, and my mom came to the door, and I sort of hid behind my mom while my mother was talking to her. At some point in the conversation, she sort of dropped in hints of what had happened in the house. There had been some trouble, and that the lady who had been in the house had died and had been through quite a lot of trauma. The neighbor told us her name was Lucinda Hagstrom. Once she had started to describe Mrs. Hagstrom, my mother remembered finding a photo in one of the upstairs bedrooms. She had me run up and grab that photo and bring it down. It turned out that the photo was actually Mrs. Hagstrom. Photo of a young woman, probably on her wedding day. She kind of had an unhappy look to her. Well, at that point, it was more of a curiosity. My mother, she was just curious. She's like, she knew she had lived in this house, and she wondered what her dreams were for the house. One of the first incidents that happened was actually to me. It was a hot summer evening. I was home alone with my mother. I'd gone upstairs to change into my pajamas. I was walking down the stairway. I'm about halfway down when I can feel what feels like a bony hand touch my back. There was a terrible smell on the stairway at the time that it happened. My heart started beating, and about halfway down, before I could grab the railing, it gave me a firm shove and pushed me down the stairs. I looked back at the empty stairs, and then I ran into the kitchen where my mother was doing the dinner dishes. I was sobbing. I tried to tell her what had happened. She would have no reason to believe at this point that I was literally pushed down the stairs. She looked at me carefully, making sure I was okay, looking over me like a mother would, and then gave me a hug. She's like, "Oh, it was just an accident. I think you're okay." A couple months later, I was also walking down the stairs. I could feel somebody behind me. I could sense that there was somebody behind me. And then the cold, bony hand in my back. But this time it wasn't just a gentle shove. This time it was a full-on, forceful push. And this time I went down the stairs pretty hard, hitting the bottom. My parents heard me hit the floor. They came running. I insisted that I felt a bony hand. There was something breathing on me before it happened. It was smelly and scary. My parents kind of looked at each other. They probably had no idea what was actually happening, but just a few months after we moved in, pretty much everybody had sensed something or heard something or seen something at that point. There's 4 siblings. They would hear voices. They'd have their hair pulled. They'd hear growling, footsteps. Saw the face of Mrs. Hagstrom in his bedroom window. Would often have doors slammed. We had 2 giant light fixtures, and they started just to sway back and forth. Somebody tapping on the window. Lisa, she felt at different times things crawling onto her bed. Our parents got us together one Monday evening and thought that they should kind of talk to us about what was going on in the house. My parents' viewpoint at that point was, yes, there are spirits living in this house, but as long as you don't bother them, they are not going to bother you. After that meeting, we kneeled down and, as a family, prayed with a prayer led by my father. Him and my mother together instructed us, do not interact and they will leave you alone. Which didn't sit very well with me because I obviously wasn't bothering them, but, I had been pushed down the stairs twice at this point. Obviously for me, even at a young age, I was like, I don't think so. I don't think this is going to work. The first major experience in the house that my mother had was pretty shocking. It was a fall afternoon and she was in the kitchen processing apples. And she heard what she thought was a kitten in the basement meowing. She decided to go down into the basement. As she was walking down the stairs, the air just started feeling colder and colder and heavier and heavier. She really just wanted to leave the basement of the house at that time, wanted to escape whatever was happening. As she went down the stairs, the sound sort of changed into a baby crying. It was that sound of the baby that stopped her. She felt a tingle, like an electrical current, pass through her body. And there, standing before her, was Mrs. Hagstrom, in the middle of the room. My mother knew who she was instantly from the photo that she had seen when we had first moved into the home. She told me that her skin looked like ash, as if a breeze would cause her to crumble. Her hair was just in filthy strands hanging around her face. My mother said her eyes were the most horrible. Then suddenly she vanished. Both my father and mother had had their own experiences with Mrs. Hagstrom in the home. So one day in June, my dad, he had a Coleman lantern that he was working on. And on that door that went directly into the basement, he heard what he thought was a tapping sound. So he looks over there and he didn't see anything. Continued to work on his project, continuing to work on the lantern. And he heard it again. The tapping kind of changed into a strong pounding. So he gets up from his seat, goes to the window again, and he sees, just beyond his own reflection, the gaunt face of a woman. It just flashed, and then it was gone. He's telling himself to pull it together. Takes a deep breath, and he just goes back to his work. Kind of looked around. Then he felt an icy finger kind of touch him on his forehead. The finger then traced his forehead and his cheek. Immediately after that, the Coleman lantern was flung from the workbench. It crashed to the concrete and shards of glass just littered the floor. As strange as this sounds, it eventually became normal to us. We learned to live with what was going on in the home. We had further incidents, but sometimes we just reacted almost indifferently to them. But I feel like the fact that I was the youngest child in the family made me a particular target of Mrs. Hagstrom. I don't know if she thought going after the baby of the family would be particularly offensive to my mother, but I definitely seemed to be the target of a lot of what was going on in the house. There was one night where I was in my room. I heard the footsteps outside in the hallway, which we did almost every night. And they would come and they would go. I heard them start walking into my room on the linoleum floor over to my bed. I could feel something pressing down on me, starting at my legs and then pressing down on my arms and my chest. I feel like the spirit was trying to either enter me or kill me. I was screaming, "Get off of me, get off of me." I felt like a car was pressing down on me, basically. It got to the point where I could barely breathe. And I was gasping for air. Like I said, all I know is at some point it did, because I went downstairs and asked my mother why she didn't hear me. Why didn't she respond? I was screaming for help, and she said that they didn't hear anything. I think this incident was a turning point for her. Up until that point, Mrs. Hagstrom was simply an annoyance, but at this point she became a real danger to our family in my mother's eyes.
It ain't over. It isn't even close to being over. More when we return in just a moment. Stay tuned. Spooksters, thanks for listening to this episode of our new season of Spooked. We're very proud because we're making this in partnership with WNYC Studios and the new Luminary Podcast Network, Be Afraid. 26 new episodes of Spook drop this season each week through Halloween and into a spooky November. Listen to them all by downloading the Luminary mobile app or go to luminarypodcast.com.
All of the newest episodes of Spooked are now available on the Luminary Podcast app, where you can also listen to other podcasts from WNYC Studios like Snap Judgment, Radiolab, Two Dope Queens, Adulting, and more. Luminary Premium is the only place where you can enjoy the entire new season of Spooked, plus new original podcasts you won't find anywhere else from Trevor Noah, Roxanne Gay, Guy Raz, Lena Dunham, and many of your other favorites. To learn more, go to luminarypodcasts.com or download the Luminary mobile app for free.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios. Welcome back. Now, when last we left, Mrs. Hagstrom had stepped way over the line. Spooked.
Up until that point, Mrs. Hagstrom was simply an annoyance, but at this point she became a real danger to our family in my mother's eyes. My mother was, I think, a very typical housewife at that time period. She was very family oriented. Her family and her kids were everything to her, and she would have done anything for them, you know. After we had lived in the house for many years, we noticed that my mother was starting to act differently. She would have to go to bed for several days at a time. As a mother, she tried to fight this, whatever it was, because she felt a strong need to take care of her family, especially with the events that were going on in the home. Finally, Dad told us what was going on, that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And we were just devastated. She wasn't able to do most of the things that she did with us before, so it came to the point where she had trouble walking. She had trouble walking up and down stairs. Increasingly, she spent more time in bed and just was unable to do anything. It was a winter day. I believe it was a few weeks before Christmas. I remember it well because we had an ice storm. There was no power in the house, you know. We had problems with power off and on all that week. But I remember walking home just feeling really odd as I walked into the house because it was completely quiet. So as I opened the door and flipped on the switch, there was no power, of course. My mother was in bed and I was the only one that had come home. First I went in and checked on my mom to see if she needed anything, and she told me she was fine and gave me a kiss and went back to sleep. I went out to the kitchen table, pulled out one of my library books and attempted to read, and it was just deadly, eerily silent in the house. You could hear a pin drop. I hear a thump upstairs. I was just determined to ignore it. At this point, I'm really hoping that some other member of my family would come home, but the pounding upstairs continued. I just assumed it was Mrs. Hagstrom up to her normal stuff. Taking advantage of the fact that I was there by myself, my mother was sick, she was pretty ruthless. Any opportunity she had to try to intimidate us, she would. She knew my mother was sick, so I think Mrs. Hagstrom's intent was to make my mother feel like she couldn't protect the baby of the family. It increased in intensity to where there was just racket, footfalls, thumping. I mean, I knew it was Mrs. Hagstrom, but this was worse than it had ever been. I heard a thunk, but this time the thunk was different. This time it was the sound of my mother falling out of bed. She had originally just tried to stand up, and the first time she tried to stand up, she fell down, but she pulled herself up again. At this point, my mother had had enough. Never underestimate the strength of a mother when she's protecting her family, because at that point, she's done. She walks out of the bedroom, and I'm right there at the bottom of the stairs, and I am like, what are you doing? You need to be in bed. And she somehow managed to walk up the stairs, one stair at a time. Each step was probably excruciatingly painful. I wanted to go up there with her, and she's like, no, just stay right here. And I'm like, what can I do for you? And she goes, kneel down there and pray for me. I loved my mother so much that I was able to focus and do what she asked me to do, which was just stay there and just start praying for her strength so that she could deal with what she was about to deal with. I'm kneeling on the floor right before the first step, and I'm holding this candle because that's in the way we could see. She somehow made her way up the steps, and she got to the top of the stairs and made her way to the storage room where all the racket was coming from. This was Mrs. Hagstrom's favorite hangout. And she threw the door open. Then the banging immediately stopped. My mother continued to grip the doorway, and she had her flashlight and shined the beam of the flashlight into the room. And at this point, she was now fighting for her family, for herself, for everything that she believed in. She yelled, "Come out, you coward." Her body seemed to have a temporary reprieve from her illness. Her body straightened. Her pain was replaced with what I would call divine determination. And she just walked into the room like she owned it, with strong strides, and she just stood in the center. And that's when she heard something whiz past her head in the darkness, and it crashed against the wall behind her. And she put the flashlight on the object on the floor, and she saw it. It was the photograph. It was the photograph that she had found so early on when we had first moved into the house, the photograph of Mrs. Hagstrom as a bride. My mother realized that part of it had hit her and that she had a cut in her forehead and she could feel the blood dripping down on her. She just couldn't believe that she had actually, at some point, felt pity for this woman, you know? She originally felt pity for her, and this woman had spent all these years terrorizing her family. She was done, you know? She had nothing left for that woman. My mother screamed into the darkness, "I'm not afraid of you. I want you out of my house, and I want you out of my house now." The room just was silent, completely silent. The only sound was my mother breathing. And then finally, Mrs. Hagstrom just slowly materialized in the corner of the room. In the most disfigured and horrible manner, a little more so than the first time she had seen her. Her eyes were basically black sockets. Skin was just gray and crumbly, looked like it was going to rot away from her face. It was pure evil. My mother just confronted her. She's like, "I'm not afraid of you, and I want you out of my house. You need to leave." Sort of a yellow, I don't know, maybe you could describe it as a yellow blaze, kind of just came from Mrs. Hagstrom's spirit. It's like a glow that basically filled the room. She describes Mrs. Hagstrom's spirit as wailing, and it was actually like writhing. It was fighting against my mother. But it eventually faded. But just before the apparition vanished, my mother, for just a brief moment, saw the spirit's face transform into the same young woman who was in the photo, just for a moment. And then she was gone. This experience, of course, had completely drained my mother. She fell to the ground. She was laying on the floor. Soon after that, my brother had come home, and I remember yelling to him down the stairs to come up, and we got her into that bed, and there was literally a change you could feel in the house. Yeah, that was basically how the situation resolved for us. It didn't resolve it completely. She was still definitely there. But she no longer bothered us. You know, you don't get between a mother and her family because you won't win.
Thank you, Curtis Meyer, for sharing your story to Spook. Curtis would like to thank his parents and his siblings for helping him survive a very unique childhood. Y'all need to run away more, in my opinion, Curtis. But if you want to read more about what life was like in the Meyer family's haunted home, check out Curtis's book. It's called Shadow of Fear. We're going to have more information on our website, spookpodcast.org. And don't forget, listeners, if you have a scary story to tell, one you've been holding on to for a long time, drop us a line, spooked@snapjudgment.org. And know this, if you dig storytelling in the bright light of day, check out our sister podcast. It's called Snap Judgment. It's available wherever you get your podcast. Let the record reflect. The people have spoken. Your wishes are command. All new Spooked episodes as we count down to All Hallows Eve. Be afraid. Spooked is brought to you by every single sound you fail to investigate in the middle of the night. And Mark Ristich. And the suspect Eliza Smith. Jacob Winnick. Original soundscape for the stories you just heard were by Leon Morimoto. The Spook theme is by Pat Mesiti Miller. My name is from Washington. They say that they want you to come upstairs for just a moment. They want to show you something. Well, reject their silent song, no matter how they word it, how they cry. Please beg, just remember this all-important safety tip: never, ever, never, ever turn out the lights. For all the newest episodes of Spooked, go to luminarypodcast.com or download the Luminary mobile app.
For all the newest episodes of Spooked, go to luminarypodcast.com or download the Luminary mobile app.
From Luminary Media, you've crossed over to Spooked. Yes, Spooksters, this is just one of the episodes from our new season of Spooked, available on Luminary Premium. Our partnership with Luminary allows us to produce 26 all-new episodes of Spooked, more than we ever have before, and all of it ad-free on the Luminary app. Sign up for Luminary Premium and access your first month of all premium shows, including the newest Spooked episode, for free. After that, the service is just $7.99 per month, and you can cancel anytime. Terms apply. Just go to luminarypodcast.com. There are people for whom stuff just happens. They are there when the house bursts into flame. They witness the robbery. Lightning strikes their tractor the very moment they step away. Just like the unfolding stories know that they need a witness, and they wait for certain people before they even begin to occur. From WNYC Studios and Snap Judgment's underground lair, my name is Glenn Washington. If the story's gonna happen, remember the details. Spook starts now. Now, when you're out in the woods at night, sitting around a campfire, poking at the coals, folk get to telling scary stories, right? Well, you know the one person in your group who just has a knack for telling the best stories? The kind of storyteller that can make you scream, jump out your seat, make the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Well, spooksters, be afraid. We found a master storyteller. His name is Todd Nara. And if you're not already around a campfire, may I suggest that you dim the lights and get real cozy. Spooked.
My name's Todd Nairn, Todd Curtis Nairn. I'm from North Carolina, and I sure would enjoy telling you a couple of these stories today. Little Barbara Nichols was a little girl I knew when I went to grade school in Corinth Holders. We were both in the first grade together, and she was beautiful. And well, all the boys thought she was beautiful, but I knew I did, but I didn't ever tell nobody. But every day I tried to get a little closer to her. She really didn't show me a lot of attention. I guess you could say she was my first love. She was just beautiful. Well, like I said, me and Barbara, she came to my little grade school in Corinth Holders, and we were in the first grade together. And I also rode the same bus to and from school. Her mom and daddy didn't have much money. She lived down an old path actually a little shack way back then that nobody had lived in, but some old farmer had rented it to them, and they made a pretty good place out of it. One day, when she got off the bus, see, I didn't think she thought nothing of me, but when she got off the bus and started walking down the path, there was some great big mud hole and she walked around it. She turned around right when she got out and threw it over the mud hole, and she turned around and she waved right directly at me. That's when I decided I was going to love little Barbara and let the whole world know it. At least that's what I hoped for, but it wasn't meant to be. Because on her walk home down that long mile path, she had to pass a little pond about 1.5 acres big. And this is where the sadness in the heart begins. You see, Barbara didn't make it home that day, and her parents went looking for her and couldn't find her. So they went down to the road and stopped people that were riding and asked them for their help. It was just amazing how many people just jumped in to it and tried to find that little girl. They screamed, they walked every inch, every mile around that house. About 9 o'clock the next morning, she was found by the banks of the little pond, now called Barbara Nichols Pond, and it's still there to this day. Back where Barbara lived, about a mile off the road, there was a bunch of wild dogs back there that people had just let go and abandoned. Enough people did this that the dogs kind of banded together, and to survive, they kind of had to be like a pack. And they would mostly kill just chickens and little goats and stuff like that. If you went by them on a motorcycle or something like that, they'd chase you. But I reckon if they ever got you, they got you. It seemed that those wild dogs were seen that day lying around that pond, and from Barbara's tracks and them dogs' tracks, it seems she must have been running to the water by them killer dogs to escape them from biting on her, and instead, my little Barbara drowned. I never did like them dogs, but I especially hated them after that. Well, everybody was really shocked. We just couldn't believe what was going on. I mean, this was really our first introduction to death. It scared us. We're all scared. We all were hurt. And we started seeing strange things happen around that pond. We began finding dead dogs floating on it or lying on the banks of it. They'd be swollen or rotting with bite marks where the turtles and catfish and buzzards were tearing into them. People would take the dogs hunting around that pond. When you called the dogs back in, at least one dog was missing. And you would go around and try to holler for the dog for the next couple of days. And if nothing else left, you'd go to Barbara Nichols Pond and that dog would be there, dead. And people just wouldn't hunt around there anymore. They just left it alone. Everybody told their little boys and girls not to ever go around that pond. We all thought, that Barbara Nichols had something to do with them dead dogs, but I mean, we never saw anything happen. We just found the dead dogs dead in there. I mean, we all kind of knew, being country folks, that I guess since Barbara Nichols had to die in there, they did too. It had to be a good 12 years. I had graduated from high school and was still working on the farm. Well, I had Uncle Hugh, and he stayed in Wake County. And he wanted to go frog gigging. That's where you catch the frogs and gig the frogs and skin them and eat the meat off the legs. Well, he wanted to come to Johnston County. He wanted me to show him the ponds around Johnston County and go frog gigging. So I said, yeah, and he promised a good time, which by this time I was a teenager, and that meant, having some beer and stuff. Oh, frog gigging, that's one of the funniest things you could ever do. You take a little John boat, which is a little lightweight boat, and you have a frog gig. Some people use a 22 gun, but he had a frog gig. Slowly go around the pond edge with a spotlight, a real strong spotlight, and you put it in the frog's eyes, and he'll stand just as still as he can be. And what you do is you got a gig, which is like a tiny little tripod for Neptune or something like that would use. And what you would do is you stick the frog, bring him in the boat, and you would kill the frog right off the bat so he wouldn't suffer. Then you would cut his legs off and put him back into the water, kind of like the circle of life kind of thing. So we go to all the ponds and everything, and nothing was happening. Nothing was happening. Probably 7 or 8 ponds. I mean, it was getting real embarrassing because we weren't getting nothing. And I told him that we would be getting some. So we didn't even have enough frogs for one person to have a meal out of. I said, I got one more pond we can go to, and I really didn't want to go to that pond. I didn't feel good about it, and I didn't even feel like I wanted to be a part of it, but I was kind of embarrassed that we didn't have nothing. I don't think I would have done it by myself. Well, I know I would have never done it by myself, but just having another person there gives you some kind of courage. It was real hard to get to, real marshy, and carrying a 300-pound boat, just the two of us, it was real heavy. You were doing all you could do just to get into the pond. And when you got in the pond, I had a lot of feelings of Barbara. I just thought it's not the place to be. And we started going around the pond edge real easy. And we were catching frogs. And we got to the back side of the pond, and we heard a dog yapping. This wasn't barking, this was like yapping in distress, like he was getting beat. We took the spotlight and shined it up there into the sides of the bank, and we saw a dog coming, yapping. He wasn't looking at us, he was looking at something behind him. Like he was just getting beat from behind and running through the water. But as fast as he was going, he hit that water out wide open. And he started swimming for the boat for all it was worth. We picked up the frog gig and the oar, and we thought, well, we don't know if he's got rabies or what he's got, but we can't let him in this boat with us. But that dog kept going faster and faster and coming nearer and nearer to us. But he was still looking behind him. And right when he got in our boat, something sucked that dog in the water, and the dog just don't drown like that. Uncle Hugh looked at me like he had never seen nothing like that in his life. And I know I had never seen anything like that in my life. That wasn't no ordinary thing. I knew something was up right then, so we were scared to death. I figured it must be little Barbara Nichols that got that dog. And she was running and she was getting revenge on them dogs, and she got a lot of revenge. I think Barbara Nichols was chasing that dog. I think she chased all them dogs. I wish that little Barbara would have went on to heaven or passed on somewhere. And I hate that she was down there running after dogs. But as fast as we could, we put that boat back on the truck and got out of there, and I ain't been back since. It's been called Little Barbara's Nickel Pond, and she can have it, I reckon.
Now, don't think for one moment that we're done with Todd Nairn, listeners. No. He's got another true, terrifying tale to share, and this one's about a curse. Dark, home-cooked magic. Spooked. Spooksters, thanks for listening to this episode of our new season of Spooked. We're very proud because we're making this in partnership with WNYC Studios and the new Luminary Podcast Network, Be Afraid. 26 new episodes of Spook drop this season each week through Halloween and into a spooky November. Listen to them all by downloading the Luminary mobile app or go to luminarypodcast.com. Welcome back to Spooked. Now, you think that we're about to leave you with just one Todd Nairn story? No. Because Todd's got another piece to share. We can't wait for you to hear it. Spooked.
My old grandfather had a brother named Uncle Frank, and he was mean in everything he did. He was so mean that nobody around there would hire him or even talk to him or have any business to do with him, except there was a rich moonshiner in the area. And Uncle Frank worked for him. That's the only job he could get. He would either whoop you. If he couldn't whoop you with a knife or a hatchet or something, he'd throw a spell on you, and you'd be dead in less than a week. Okay, now Grandma told me the spell went like this, but she wouldn't tell me all of it because she didn't want me or Walker Jr. doing it. She said you had to get a cat, a dead cat. You couldn't go out and kill a cat or anything like that. And you take that cat and you put him in a pot, outside of course, and you boil it until all the meat and the hair and everything's gone. There's nothing but the bones left. You take those bones and you have to take it to a river or a little creek, somewhere where there was running water, and you toss the bones into the running water. And then there's one cat bone and a cat and a float. The other one's a sink in that river, that running water, but the other one a float, and that's the one you're gonna be needing is that floating bone. You take that float bone and you got you a dead man on the way. So if you get the floating cat bone and take it back to whoever your enemy is or whoever you want to get, you put it under his rug, and when that man stepped out onto that rug, they would step on that cat bone, and the death spell would be all over him. But that's all she would tell us about the spell, because she knew that Uncle Frank was in us too. His blood was in us, and she didn't want us to turn out like Uncle Frank. One morning, he got up, he slicked back his hair, cussed a little bit, and walked out the back door and stepped on the rug, and he felt a little lump. And me and you might not worry about what the little lump was, but we just keep going. But Uncle Frank knew what that was. So he picked up the rug, and there it was, a floating cat bone. So somebody had finally gotten Uncle Frank, and he was sure mad about it. So he had a spell all over him, and he knew right then, sure enough, that he was dead. But he was going to do everything in his power to make sure he found out who it was that killed him. So somebody told him about a witch, so that's where Uncle Frank went. And she told him there wasn't nothing that she can do for him. That in less than a week, and probably a couple of days, he'd be dead. She said, but there is one thing that she could do. She said, just as soon as you die, you're probably going to go straight to hell. You're going to see the devil. And you can make a deal with the devil. He would kill the man that killed Uncle Frank, but if you did this and made a deal with the devil, you would burn hot, twice as hot as a regular sinner. But Uncle Frank, he figured hot was hot, so who cares about being twice as hot? So he made that deal with the witch and the devil. And then he went back to my grandmama and he told her, he said, just as soon as I die, wait for the next person in the community to die, and that'll be the one that killed me. It didn't take me just a few days, and he fell dead as a doornail. Just as healthy as he could be. And he was a cussing, then he just fell dead right in front of the smokehouse. And about 30 minutes after Uncle Frank died, Grandma sat there and she listened. You know, and after a while it come in that the preacher had died. And she was kind of surprised that it was the preacher. And when they went through his pockets, they found 3 other floating cat bones. So we don't know how many people he killed, but he sure killed a bunch of sinners. He was planning on killing a lot more sinners with them floating cat bones. They say all the youngins got together, put Frank up, brought him back in the house in the living room, and washed him and cleaned him up and everything. So, I mean, we didn't do no autopsy or nothing like that back then. We just grabbed him up, cleaned him up, and tried to get him ready for burial. And they called the funeral man, but the funeral man said they weren't going to come and work on Uncle Frank. He was just too mean. Well, they laid him out in the living room and hoping with somebody, you know, some of his friends or somebody would come by, but Uncle Frank didn't have no friends. So they didn't know what to do with him. They called the churchyard and they said, can we bury Frank in the churchyard? And the church people said no, because we can't sell the lots beside him. Nobody wants to be beside Uncle Frank. And they couldn't find nowhere to put Uncle Frank. So my granddaddy went down to the back of the farm and started digging, but it was red clay. He couldn't get about a foot down in the ground. So they had a neighbor And we all called her Aunt Rude, but I don't really know what her real name was. And they wouldn't ask her. She said they could go way down in the bottom of the farm, but it just had to be far enough away from her house because she didn't want Frank close to her. So that's what he did. He went way down in the bottom of her farm. She dug a hole and buried him. And he couldn't afford no stone, so he just got a white azalea bush and put it on top of Uncle Frank. Aunt Rue, yeah, we went to her house quite often, me and my brother. She was a real old by the time me and Walker Jr. came along. But she always had sugar cookies and cola and everything, anything we wanted to do, she would do it. She was one of the sweetest persons I'd ever known. One weekend I was just too sick. I was down in the throat, couldn't hardly swallow. And it was our weekend to go to our grandma and granddaddy's. Well, Walker Jr. knew that he'd be kind of bored with nobody his age to play with. Walker Jr.'s my brother, so he carried his best friend, Ben O'Neill, down there to play. So Walker Jr. and Ben O'Neill were looking around trying to find something to do. So back in the 70s, wasn't much to do. I mean, even if you looked at TV, you had to watch what the grown folks watched, and that wasn't no fun. They found some fishing poles. Well, they knocked on Aunt Rue's door. They asked, could they go fishing? And she said, of course they could. Did they have any worms? And they said, no. She said, well, go down there by the tobacco field, dig up some worms. They ended up going a little bit farther than they should. They started digging worms right up under a white azalea bush. But this is about 40 years later after Uncle Frank had died. And sure enough, they had hit something. And they looked real hard at it, and it was a skull. And it was worms, great big worms, just crawling everywhere, in and out of the holes of his eyes and his nose and everywhere else. So they thought they hit the jackpot. They were just scared of the skull. Ben O'Neill took the skull, and he took it out of the hole, and he started chasing my brother, ain't like he was gonna bite his ear off or something. Because Walker Jr. wouldn't touch no skull or nothing like that. Finally, Walker Jr. told him to take it back, but Ben O'Neill was a little bit lazy, so he just put it down beside his stomach and kept going. But anyway, they went fishing, and them worms were something tough because every time they tried to put them on the hook, he could swear they would run. And they throw the worms into the pond with the hook and the cane pole, and it seemed like every fish in the pond go to the other side of the pond, so there wasn't much fish caught that day. And they walked back to Granddaddy's house, and they didn't tell nobody nothing about finding that skull. So they thought, well, what else can we do fun now? So they said, let's spend a night in the smokehouse, camping out. So they camped. They got the quilts and the Coca-Colas and all the candies they could get, or Grandma would give them. They went out and they laid out in the smokehouse. They played in and laughing and stuff. And it got kind of late, so they started laying down to go to sleep. But when they did, something started crawling on their toes and went up to their ankles and went up to their legs. It just went all over. They started itching all over. And we didn't know if they had the chiggers or what was wrong. But they went busting through Grandma's bedroom door, saying that something was eating them up. And what they did, she said, what'd y'all get into? You know, like she didn't know if they got in something they were allergic to or something. So they finally told her about the skull. Well, she knew exactly who the skull was. So she said, she put on her clothes and she said, take me to the skull. So that's what they did. In the middle of the night, they walked down there with a flashlight and they found the skull beside his stump. Ben O'Neill picked it up and they told her to go put it back in the hole. And when they did, they put it back in the hole. The worms just come from everywhere and crawled all over that skull. But the itching went away, just went away, like somebody put a salve or something on it. It just kind of disappeared. When they put that skull back where it's supposed to be, and they walked home that night, they said nobody said a word. But they just come home and telling me they found the skull. I said, no, you're lying. Ain't no way in the world. He said, I did. I was real jealous. Well, actually, I wanted to see the skull, but he never would take me back there. But yeah, I'm kind of glad I wasn't there because Walker Jr. and Ben O'Neill were two good little boys. They were real good. They didn't do no harm to nobody. But when they dug up that skull, Uncle Frank, them boys seemed like they changed. My brother got a little wilder, doing things he wasn't supposed to. My brother was in another town, a town he shouldn't have been in, and the cops saw him. Well, the cops got behind him, and Walker Jr. made a bad choice and decided to run. And they were running him down, and he overcorrected in the curve, and it flipped him out of the car, and it flipped on top of him and it killed him. I was 13, he was 19. Ben O'Neill, I thought the world of him. Everybody did. He was a sweet boy, but after that, after he touched that skull, he took his own way, because Ben O'Neill turned out to be a little meaner than Uncle Frank, really. He joined up with a motorcycle gang. It was a motorcycle club. You get that right. Yeah, I mean, all motorcycle clubs ain't bad, but this particular club was bad. And after he'd been there a while, he just got to be too bad. And I guess that he got so bad that the rest of them got scared. And two of them held him down and they cut his head off. And they put it somewhere out in the woods. So, we don't know where his head is. We know where his body is, but we don't know where his head is. It's somewhere in Johnson County. I hope it ain't Uncle Frank that did all that to my brother and to Ben, but I don't, I can't say he didn't. I guess you could say I was kind of blessed that I had a sore throat that weekend, because I didn't get to see what they saw. If I had maybe Uncle Frank would have jumped on me. There's no telling I'd even be here right now talking to you. You never know about evil. It's just got a way of following you around once you get into it. And sometimes you just can't shake evil.
Love and light to Todd Naren for sharing his story for Spooked. Thank you, Todd, for giving us those heebie-jeebies. Now, Todd asks us to give a shout out to the good Lord Jesus Christ, to Todd's family, and to Miss Anna Sussman for taking a chance on him. If you want more stories from Todd Naren, not to worry, because Todd has a book. It's called Country Stories of Ghosts and Bad Men. That's Country Stories of Ghosts and Bad Men. Now then, let the people understand. Tell your friends. Tell your enemies that you know where monsters dwell. The magical, the scary, the dark Spook podcast, where this season we spare no expense in search of the truth behind the veil. And if you like your stories told in the bright light of day, check out our sister podcast. It's called Snap Judgment. Cinema of sound, movies of the mind, storytelling with a beat. Spook is brought to you by The Crackling Fire and Mark Ristich, Anna Sussman, Eliza Smith, Jacob Winnick. Our original soundscape by Renzo Gorio. The Spook theme song was by Pat Mesiti Miller. And remember, always listen to the storytellers, always. And know this, without fail, every single storyteller worth their salt, every single one will always advise you to never, ever turn out the lights. For all the newest episodes of Spooked, go to luminarypodcast.com or download the Luminary mobile app. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord, my soul to keep, but if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord, my soul to take. You're listening to Spooked. Stay tuned. From Luminary Media, you've crossed over to Spooked. Yes, Spooksters. This is just one of the episodes from our new season of Spooked, available on Luminary Premium. Our partnership with Luminary allows us to produce 26 all-new episodes of Spooked, more than we ever have before, and all of it ad-free on the Luminary app. Sign up for Luminary Premium and access your first month of all premium shows, including the newest Spooked episode, for free. After that, the service is just $7.99 per month, and you can cancel anytime. Terms apply. Just go to luminarypodcast.com. Now, we didn't celebrate traditional holidays growing up. Easter, Valentine's Day, Christmas, those were something other people did. Later on, thankfully, I had friends, and I finally did get to celebrate these holidays that I always heard about. I spent my first Christmas at my buddy's house. And such good times. So warm, so happy, such love. These were the things missing from my home at the time. And the food. Good Lord. My buddy's family, they're Hindu, so on top of their tree, in their family home, rested a figurine of Ganesha, the elephant-headed god. And seeing Ganesha, golden, serene, looking down at us, blessing us, it made me feel warm. Inside, loved, safe. And I'm not Hindu. I'm not, but since then in my own home, with my own kids, Ganesha sits on top of my tree. He still makes me feel safe, warm, and happy, like in my surrogate home when I was younger. And I know how lucky I am because I still remember an older figurine. It was silver. 2 masks, hollow-eyed, one mask grinned, but his twin sneered and sat near the lamp in my grandmother's TV room. And it felt like both pairs of eyes stared at us when we watched cartoons, as we ate cornflakes, and we played hide and go seek, to the point where we would retreat to the kitchen or to the porch. We'd tell Granny that we didn't want to watch TV anymore. And I don't know that figurine that caused the sadness of that place, or if it just reflected what was already there. I just remember how those empty eyes burned. My name is Tim Washington. I told you what's in my home. Tell me what's in yours. Spook starts now. Now then, slumber parties, they should be all about friendship. Staying up too late, making soda come out of your nose, right? But what if someone shows up with a book of spells and starts invoking spirits? Well, you'd run the other way, right? Well, this is Spooked. I'm gonna tell you, what happens when you stand right in front of the mirror, you chant someone's name 3 times, and wait to see what happens. Bonnie Black lets us know her tale. Spooked.
My name is Bonnie Black. I grew up in Lunenburg, Massachusetts, and I lived with my mom, my dad, and my 2 brothers. I was 11 years old. I was having a sleepover with my friends Amanda and Sarah. We were sitting in the living room, which was right outside of my bedroom. And we were sitting in a circle. We thought it was really cool that my friend had got this book of spells. the last thing I wanted was for my mom to find out what we were doing, because I know that she does not approve of messing around with the spiritual world. She wouldn't let us have a Ouija board. She didn't want any of that in the house. My mom told us that it was 11 o'clock and it was time to go to bed, so we went into my room, but nobody was really ready to go to bed. So we turned off all the lights, turned on a lamp, and my friend put a scarf on top of it. There was just kind of a red hue in a dark room full of shadows. That's when my friend Amanda decided that she would try and do Bloody Mary into one of the mirrors on my furniture. My friend Amanda stood in front of the mirror on the vanity that was next to my bed. My friend Sarah and I stood behind her, not sure if we should be in the reflection of the mirror or not, because we weren't sure if we wanted to be involved. Amanda said, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." My friend Sarah, who was taking it really seriously, was like, "You guys need to, quit messing around." She thought that this was, sacrilegious, or that it wasn't what God would have wanted. And we all panicked that something might happen, but nothing did happen. And Amanda was so sure that it was going to work, and she was really disappointed. So at that point, I think we gave up and just went to bed. 2 nights later, it had to at least have been, 11 or midnight, I was just laying there trying to fall asleep. And I felt uneasy, and I don't know why, but I turned to look at my nightstand, the vanity, which is right next to my bed, and in the reflection of the mirror, I could see a small child standing next to my bed in front of the vanity, picking up all these little bottles that were on the vanity. They were full of, bath salts and, little crystals and just, sand from different beaches I'd traveled to, just different things that I'd collected in these little glass bottles. And he was picking them all up and smelling them one at a time and then putting them back down. He existed like a hologram that was being projected out of the mirror. He was being really quiet and very delicate, so the only sound that he was making was just a little bit of, that much noise. Just picking something up and putting it down. My initial feeling when I saw this little kid was complete confusion. Because he looked like he was from American Victorian era. He had a hat on. It looked like it was a hand-me-down. It looked like it was too big for his head. He was wearing rags, and he was kind of dirty, and he had a kind of soft face. He's standing facing the mirror, and I'm basically looking at him in the face.
Jesus Christ. I'm getting so into it. Hi, honey.
Notice me.
Scared the hell out of me.
When he noticed me, that's when he turned
Woo!
and smiled
I get
like
into
a
this.
Cheshire
Oh
cat.
my god.
It was so wide and unhuman looking. It was much too wide. His eyes went from being kind of a dullish gray to almost an intense black cherry jello color.
What's the matter, honey?
as he smiled, his teeth grew into daggers.
Hi.
And
Hello.
he unclenched his jaw and they started dripping with blood.
Come on.
I panicked. I felt completely immobilized and I had no idea
No.
what to do.
No.
I was
That's
trying
not
not to
fair.
breathe. I was trying not to make any sort of visible signs that I was alive or there. All I thought about was, if he doesn't notice me, he'll go back to leaving me alone. I pulled the blankets over my head and I stayed like that, motionless, for pretty much the whole night. I woke up for school the next morning extremely tired. The first gut reaction that I had the next morning was, well, I hope that wasn't real. I wanted to talk about it, but I also didn't want to sound insane. I didn't mention it to my friends either because, you know, I had been making fun of my friend who was taking it seriously, and then I was also making fun of my friend who thought it was religiously wrong to be messing around with ghosts, so I just didn't say anything. The second night, I'm laying in bed and I'm reading my book, and every page or two I glance over at the mirror. That's when the uneasy feeling hit me. And I looked over and the boy was there again.
That's right, spooksters. He's back. The Sharp-Toothed Boy episode returns in just a moment. Stay tuned. Spooksters, thanks for listening to this episode of our new season of Spook. We're very proud because we're making this in partnership with WNYC Studios and the new Luminary Podcast Network, Be Afraid. 26 new episodes of Spook drop this season each week through Halloween and into a spooky November. Listen to them all by downloading the Luminary mobile app or go to luminarypodcast.com. Welcome back. Now, when last we left, the Sharp-Toothed Boy had just made his return. Spooked.
And I looked over and the boy was there again. He's wearing the same outfit. He's picking up things off of the vanity. He's just inspecting them. And as soon as he notices that I can see him, he turns. His eyes get angry. He does the evil smile. And his teeth turn into bloody knives. I pulled the covers over my head and pretended like it didn't exist. Now it's real. So now this seems more of like a problem that I need to solve because I don't want to get in trouble for there being ghosts in my mom's house. I don't know if I fell asleep or if I managed to stay awake the entire night, but eventually I could hear my mom making coffee, and I knew it was safe to take the blankets off of my face and get up. And so I thought maybe if I could figure out a little bit more about this kid, I could, you know, make him go away by figuring out what it is that he needed. So I got up and immediately started inspecting the vanity to see if I could tell what the boy had touched, you know, if there was any fingerprints, anything that would help me figure out who he was or what he was doing, or even just to prove that it had happened. And as far as I could tell, there wasn't. when I got ready to go to bed the following night, I do normal bedtime routine, brush my teeth, and I hoped maybe, maybe he got it out of his system the first 2 nights. Maybe he's over it. I was only sleeping on my back because I didn't want to sleep on my side facing away from him, because what if he's gonna do something? I didn't want to sleep on my side facing him, because then I'd just be staring at him. So I was just sleeping on my back, like staring at the ceiling, trying not to look either direction. So after about an hour of laying in my bed, I looked over, and he was there. Again. Instead of pulling the covers over my head, I looked to the other side of my room, and in the streetlights coming through the windows, in the reflections of the 2 mirrors that were on the opposite walls from each other, there was a whole party going on in my room. It was the same time period, but these people were much better dressed. And I could only see the portion of them that was being projected from the mirrors. I couldn't see anything that was below the mirror line. And there were probably, I would say about 12 people in the room. And it looked like they were having a tea party or a dance or something. And they were all having a very good time until they noticed that I could see them. And then they stopped. They all turned, looked at me, and did the exact same thing that the boy did. Where their eyes got dark, and their mouths sort of curled up and they smiled, and their teeth all turned into these sharp, pointy daggers that were dripping with blood. I was absolutely terrified. Now I'm outnumbered. And then I did start chanting, "Just go away, this isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real, you're not real. Dear God, if you fix this, I'll never screw around with supernatural ever again. Like, please just make this go away." So I stayed under the covers until I could see the sun coming up through the blinds, and then I got up. Day 4 was a little bit harder for me because it was very hard to ignore the fact that happened, and I very desperately wanted to tell someone, but at this point, this is sounding like a crazier and crazier thing to tell someone, so it's getting harder and harder to talk about, because now it's not just, oh, I saw a ghost once, now it's, well, now I'm being haunted. I didn't want to drag anybody else into this with me. The last thing my mom needed was more stress in her life. At the same time, even if I told her and she was really receptive to the concept, what is she going to do about it? I went to school and everything seemed fine. The 4th night was terrifying. So my plan actually that night was I was gonna try and talk to them. Because at this point they're clearly not going away, they're clearly not getting any less aggressive, and After these 3 nights, I absolutely had not been getting very much sleep. I was just gonna say whatever came to my mind when I saw whoever appeared that night. I was basically going through my mind like, hi, I'm Bonnie, who are you? It's like, that's weird, do you introduce yourself to a ghost? Is that better or worse if they know my name? Like, what do they already know? I don't know. You know, like, should I be formal? Should I try and shake hands? Do you shake hands with a ghost? Do I want to touch a ghost? And I was like, I'll try and talk to them tonight, and then we'll figure out what the problem is, and then we'll fix it. And then nothing happened. The boy didn't show up, the people didn't show up, nothing happened. I just stayed in bed, not moving, waiting for them to show up. I woke up the next morning and I wanted the mirrors gone. The mirrors are heavy, so I had to move all 3 of the pieces of furniture away from the wall and then unmount them, and I wanted to get rid of them. My mom didn't want to get rid of them, so we wrapped them up in cardboard and shoved them in the back of, like, the closet with the water heater or something. The first night that the mirrors were off the furniture, I felt so relieved. I just felt like that eerie, creepy, lingering feeling was gone. Whatever realm had been opened was closed. That I felt like I could go to sleep. I just felt like a weight was lifted off of my chest, like physically lifted off of my chest. I felt like I could breathe. I never talked to anybody about the ghosts, but they were always there in the back of my mind. And every time we moved, the mirrors came with us. So the next time I had to make a decision about the mirrors was when I moved to Chicago when I was 18. They were still in cardboard in the back of my parents' laundry room. And when I packed up my set to move to Chicago, my dad asked if I wanted to take them with me, and I said no. My mom asks why I don't want to bring the mirrors with me when I move. We were sitting in the kitchen, and so I finally told her about the visions, about the boy, about the other people, and that it freaked me out and that I didn't want to have them anymore. And she didn't seem surprised. I mean, I think everyone's mom has, different faces that they make that you know what that emotion means. Like, oh, I've known about this the whole time. It's nice that you finally fessed up. Like that kind of a face. She told me that she already knew about it. I was kind of stunned that she already knew about it. Not only that she already knew about it, but that she wanted me to take them with me. She felt comfortable keeping the mirrors in the house, and why she felt comfortable, telling me to move them is because she had done something about it. She had been visited by the devil at the same point. And the devil told my mom that I had been messing around with the spirit world and shouldn't have been, and that I had invited an evil element into our home. She believes that the devil is a fallen angel whose job is to take care of the souls of the dead and the damned, and not that he's trying to lure people into a life of sin, so much as he's been charged with taking care of them. It seemed that he was concerned about my soul's future and that she needed to do something about this. And so while I was at school that 4th day, she exorcised my room and had cleansed all of the evil spirits. So I have no idea what she did, but it seems to have worked. It was the most matter-of-fact thing I think I've ever heard. I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense than that, like, through my complete inaction, this stopped. It makes a lot more sense that something was actually done, and that's why it stopped. When I was 28, and I had moved into a condo in Chicago that had, you know, basement storage space and extra closets. My parents end up bringing the mirrors up to Chicago. Why do these mirrors keep following me? I don't want them. I told my friend Beth this story about the ghost many years before this, when we first met when I moved to Chicago. So she's kind of always known that this was, you know, a part of my life. And she got really excited and was like, oh my god, can I have them? She was like, you don't want them? Can I have them? Can I make them into art? And so I said, absolutely, yes, please take them away. So I'm not an artist, so I'm probably going to tell you the wrong method of whatever she's doing, but when you make something into a mirror, you use some sort of process that puts a silver glaze onto it, and she basically did the exact opposite, where she pulled the glaze off and then superimposed old photos that she got at thrift stores. Like vintage photos of people that she thought looked like the people that I was telling her about. So it's still a mirror, but there's also, it looks like sort of a window with these pictures of people in them. So when I saw them in the gallery, the pictures are of real people, and they were the wrong era. They didn't look like the ghosts that I saw. It was actually kind of refreshing. Like making a joke at their expense. Like, oh, we've reimagined you and now you're these people. And you can't scare me anymore.
Thank you, Bonnie Black, for sharing your story to Spooked. We are so glad, so very happy to hear that you got rid of that dresser. The original score was by Leon Morimoto. That piece was produced by Chris Hambrick. You've been listening to Spooked, Snap Judgment production. If you dig stories that were not born in the dark of the nighttime, check out our sister podcast. It's amazing storytelling, Snap Judgment. Storytelling with a B, Snap Judgment to the ORG. My name is from Washington. Spooked is produced by Mark Ristich, by Anna Sussman, our chief spookster, Eliza Smith, Chris Hambrick, Annie Nguyen, Tiffany Elisa, Ann Ford, and Eric Yanez. Our sound team is Lauren Newsom.
Go back, baby girl.